We started this podcast because so many black belts and green belts, what I was finding is they get out of their training, they're really overwhelmed with the information, and they're just kind of like left a little bit empty, wondering, okay, what's next?
Chances are many organizations that have just started the program don't have that flexibility or luxury of having a mentor. Kind of reinforces or gives some, confirmation to, hey, what I'm hearing or what I'm doing actually makes sense, or this is what I'm struggling with, and that's common, so that's fine.
So that's why you and I are here each week to be their regular coaches. So we're going to continue to support all of you guys who are listening so long as you continue to support us. We really appreciate you joining us on our journey. Tell your friends and colleagues all about us. Subscribe on iTunes. Leave us a 5-star review to help us reach more Lean Six Sigma and quality professionals. You can search for E6S Methods Podcast in the search field on iTunes, or you can find us under the business and career section. And by all means, keep listening. We have lots more coming.
And if you ever have feedback or ever have some comments, or even if you need a quick coaching tip, feel free to reach out on our website, e6smethods.com.
Welcome to the E6S Methods Podcast with Jacob and Aaron, your source for expert advice on Lean, Six Sigma, and performance improvement methods. In this episode number 23, Don't Skimp the Charter, we discuss the importance and contents of good project charter that authorizes the black belt to push for change. Here we go.
Hey Jacob, how are you?
I'm great, Aaron. How are you?
Jacob, I am doing well. Today we're going to talk about our episode number 23. We're really getting closer. We're almost at 6 months now. You know that?
Wow. Quarter century, huh?
quarter century?
Yeah.
How's that work?
100 episodes, you're hitting 25. That's quarter century.
Oh, okay. I was thinking, how does he think that 6 months
in
is
time?
1/4 of 100 years?
No, I meant in episode count.
Yeah. So, yeah, we're creeping up on 26, and we're almost done with define phase. So 6 months, getting through define phase, sounds like a high C endeavor to me.
I hope you guys who are listening is not taking this long for projects for define phase, because you've already failed if that's the case. So hopefully you're putting all this together and trying to learn all this and try to apply this in maybe 2 to 3 weeks.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is we're in here for the long haul, so we don't mind doing one subject over the course of 1 week or multiple weeks, because this stuff's going to be out there for eternity, hopefully.
Let's hope so.
All right, so we're going to talk about the project charter, and the main message here is don't skimp on the charter. I will say, in my experience, very seldom seen a project charter, and usually you just get a project definition, problem statement, if lucky, but a lot of the elements that make up the full charter, which is basically your authorization to even do the project in the first place, the charter is usually skipped. So I'm saying, don't do it. You got all the information, get it all together. You might as well get it in all in one spot, so everybody's on the same page, communicating with your stakeholders, your team members, your champions, and get them to buy off and commit. This is the one direction that this project needs to go, and you guys are all signed up for it. Sign your name here.
So, as you were alluding to this earlier, I will admit, and maybe this is because both our backgrounds were kind of similar where we started off, is I've never heard of what a project charter was until probably the last year and a half. Now, the question arises, what is a project charter, and how is that different from, let's say, the problem statement, the goal, and the scope? And, from what I've seen, what I've read around, it's really no different. It's actually just putting all those pieces of information together, and just like you pointed out, Aaron, getting all the relevant people to sign off on it and agree this is what we are going to focus our attention to or work on.
Right.
And, the one thing I've noticed mainly charters previously to projects being done mainly for a group setting or a council or some sort of a support group, let's say, putting together, trying to say, what's the mission, vision of this support group, who is going to be here, what is the frequency of the meetings, just high-level stuff on trying to give everybody a perspective to evaluate, are we really doing what we set out to do? That's the scenario where I've seen charters being used the most. And if you do a Google search on it, that's probably where you're going to see most of the charters around. But you can use that similar concept to projects to say, or to clearly say, what are you going to do, why are you going to do it, and what's the vision for this.
If you follow the PMBOK, which is the Project Management Body of Knowledge, the charter is the first thing that gives you the authorization to even have a project. It should be, by their definition, should come down from the executive C-level suite, says, okay, we authorize this project to take place. They sign it, and they assign you as the project manager to be the person to have the authority to utilize the resources to get it done. And so there's a little bit of crossover there, and that might be why a lot of these don't seem to get done in the Lean Six Sigma world, is because it's not, in my opinion, the training that we give and have received in Lean Six Sigma is not as stringent on the project management side of on project management side of the project, and goes a lot more into the tools and to the statistics. And so what I'm actually trying to do is to bring a lot of that project management back into the E6S methods curriculum, because that's where a lot of the projects I've seen fail, is on the project management side.
Absolutely.
All right, so some of the objections you might get, if you try to do the charter, is, it's just another piece of paper, and we've got to get the signatures, and it's just a lot of bureaucracy. And, the champion said, go ahead, I support it, just get it done. So why bother needing a project charter then? Everybody says we're good. Yeah, okay, it may be another piece of paperwork, and it's bureaucratic. That's what bureaucracy does. But the project charter is a tool for communication. It is bureaucracy, and like most bureaucracy, it facilitates communicating, which for some reason, especially in business, people just don't seem to do very well on their own unless they have something to say, you have to communicate. This is a tool, the project charter, that says you have to communicate. Everybody reads through this project charter and the scope and everything that's in there and says, okay, you understand what you're signing up for? Yes, I understand what I'm signing up for. Champion signs it, project manager signs it, team member signs it. And why get the signatures? I don't know what your experience is, but I've had people have conversations with me and we're on the same page. 2 days later, 2 weeks later, they forget what we agreed to. It's good to have that signature to just go back and remind people where they are.
Yeah, and sometimes people will nod their head and agree to whatever it is, but then when you put, like you said, pen to paper and say, are you agreeing to this? That's when they really dig into their thoughts and dig deeper to say, oh yeah, maybe I don't agree with what I just said now, or maybe I don't agree what we agreed on, so we have to recorrect that. So, it's just putting another layer of clarification to make sure this is what we are agreeing to.
That's exactly right. How many times are you talking, or you're in the same conversation with somebody, and it happens with me and one of my daughters. She says, I want this for dinner, so I make that. She's like, but I didn't want it like this. I'm like, we didn't talk about that. I had something in my mind, you had something in your mind. We thought we were talking about the same thing, but we really weren't. So it's good to get that on paper, and especially if people are going to sign it. They might say, let me look at this a little bit closer before I sign my name to it.
Exactly.
All right, so we talked a little bit about the importance and purpose of the project charter. I also talked about some of the misunderstandings, and this could happen between you and the champion. And if you and the champion are not on the same page, that's where you start to get to the difficulties with your stakeholder management of your champion. The champion thought he was getting one thing, and you started bringing the project somewhere else. Maybe it's out of scope, maybe it's not. Maybe you just had different opinions on the scope, and that's why it's, getting back to our last episodes, the interaction between the black belt and the champion is critical. And if you are not already given a charter from up high that stipulates all these things, I recommend that you work through this charter directly with your champion. So the charter itself, it grants the authority for the project to take place, and it outlines sort of the main deliverables and the deadlines for you to carry forward. It really does authorize the project manager, the black belt or the green belt, to utilize the resources that are available, tells you which resources are available in order to just bring this to success. It knights you, grant you the authority to utilize the resources here to carry this out with limited intervention from me, and me being the champion or some other higher up stakeholder. All right, so what are the typical contents of the project charter?
I think we alluded to some. One of the ones that I typically want to look for is the definition. So what is it that this is trying to solve, or what is it that this is trying to do? Typically a problem statement, an objective statement, or your goal, and what a business case is. What is the reason why you want somebody to work on this project is something that I always look for in a project charter, because that kind of clarifies what exactly are we trying to do here.
Sure.
The other big tool that I like to refer a lot is the scope. I want to really see what is it that's in scope, because again, a problem can be really huge. Focusing on what is critical and what is not is something that is important, and kind of defining what's in scope and what's out of scope is something that really needs to be clarified up front, because again, some of the stakeholders might feel otherwise. So you want to articulate what you are really putting your effort into and what you're not.
Right, as we talk about differing opinions, some stakeholders might think, oh, this would be a perfect time to weave in my little pet project that I was trying to do in this other area, which may or may not be in scope or out of scope. So you got to really make it clear what the scope is, and even more clear, what are you not going to touch?
Yeah, and I think, from personal experience, it's always easier to say what's not in scope, because that will help you clear. Anything that's not in scope is kind of what's in scope. Trying to put it in that way, I think that's at least what gives clarity to things.
Right.
Besides that, one of the other things I look for mainly is kind of identifying the team and maybe the stakeholders. Mm-hmm. And when I mean by team, it's going to be who are the people that I'm expecting to work on this, what sort of time commitment are they expecting from them. If there's any support needed, maybe some support services or some infrastructure or maintenance sort of needs or equipment needs, some specific things. What are those going to be? Because I think that's going to drive, again, maybe not equipment, but that's going to drive another component that I look at is what is everybody's roles and responsibilities. So I have a team here. Mm-hmm. How are these team members going to contribute, and what part are they going to contribute to?
Right, so you have your team that you kind of select based on their expertise and what you need to get done within there, but then you also have, support, which may be an outside entity of IT or some sort of accounting role. They're not really on the team, but they are a support service that you should understand up front. This may require some sort of extra work from this area.
And then clarifying the roles and responsibilities is something which is, again, pretty important, because you want the team members to know what are they in this role, what are they in this project team for, and at the same time, what is the expectation from them? Because again, in a bigger project, you want to clarify that, hey, Aaron, this is what I'm really expecting you to work here, and you don't have to put as much effort in these other areas, even though that might be of your interest. I don't want you to focus on that. Mm-hmm. And then it comes down to, again, who has the authority? Who is the final approver, or who is the final person who's responsible for making sure the tasks or the particular assignments are being completed or done that's necessary for the success of this project.
Right.
Who can drive the budget, who can drive this. You want to get those kind of clarity up front so that at the end of the day, everything's black and white. There is no gray areas in between. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You are listening to E6S Methods Podcast, brought to you by E6S Industries. Join us on our website at www.e6s-methods.com. Journey through success.
This episode of the E6S Methods Podcast is brought to you by me. That's right. No one is paying me for these podcasts, not even you. So do me a favor. Go to my website and check it out. If you see something you like and you can use, buy it. If you don't see anything you like, then don't buy it. But do send me a message and let me know what you would buy if it were available. Go ahead and check us out at www.e6s-methods.com. Thanks a lot. This is sort of a philosophy I adopted from the Army, is that you can delegate, you cannot delegate responsibility. That is, the champion to the black belt cannot delegate responsibility. If the black belt fails at their project, the champion is responsible for that. However, you can delegate authority. So while the champion is responsible for the success of the black belt has the authority to go ahead and make the project successful. And there's a little bit of a difference there. And I'll be honest, not everybody shares this philosophy, and sometimes rolls downhill, and if the black belt fails, sometimes the champion gets off scot-free. But in a healthy, thriving environment where the champions are policing each other, that champion should still hold on to responsibility for that success. So that's why also getting on the same page, keeping the communication tight, getting those signatures of commitment on the charter, and the only time you bail on the charter is when the project scope completely changes and you say, okay, we need to revisit this. Do we kill it, keep it, or change it? And again, that's an official process. If you want to change the charter, go ahead and change the charter. Go through and establish commitment and resources and budget and whatever you got to go through.
And as we're discussing this more and more, to be honest, a whole part of this charter might be the same thing that you're going to go through in your define phase of your project. So, the question is, do you get to that level of detail in the define phase, or the charter needs to be as detailed as the final define phase? Again, the answer is my answer is depending on the complexity of the project and the detail level of the people putting together the charter, that's going to drive the amount of detail that's going into it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, personally, I think that a charter that goes, any longer than 3 pages is probably a little bit overkill, because you still haven't figured out, you haven't gone into, it's a Six Sigma project, so you haven't planned everything out to a T, so it's not a 20-page document. You really just started getting to know your team members and stakeholders, so you have a living document of how your stakeholders are going to react. The project charter should pretty much be done when you select your team. That way all they have to do is understand the charter and sign it before you really kick off and into your measure phase. But yeah, I'll agree, a lot of what you were uncovering in the define phase should be summarized in this charter.
So what else is there? Typically in a charter, there's going to be some level of high-level timelines or milestones. Mm-hmm. What are some deadlines you're trying to meet? By when do you plan to finish the project? When do you expect some of these milestones, or maybe toll gates, or depending on how your stakeholder group evaluates the success of the project or measures the progress of the project? You want to clearly say you want to hit these deadlines or timelines in that.
Yeah, there may be some drop dead dates, something with the market. If you can't hit these dates, then it's all for naught. So there may be some real critical dates that should be made very clear up front. Okay, and it's not often that I see this in a Lean Six Sigma project, but budget. Most Lean Six Sigma projects have no budget, meaning they're not really authorized to spend anything. But that doesn't mean that they're not costing anything. So it may be wise to actually put in a budget for budgeted labor hours of the team members and people you're going to use, any travel you got to do, capital equipment, which up front you may not really expect to have, but maybe some contracted services as well. Just keep in mind there are some cost concerns in doing this project, and it may be wise to put a budget into the charter.
And I think this is going to be an estimate. Again, it's not necessarily, you're not really going to know until you get into details of the analyze, or how big is the problem, or how crazy is the problem. You're not going to know, who are the people you need to involve, whether you need to bring some specialists, or that you got to start involving suppliers, and you need to, have some travel elements for the suppliers to come meet you, or you to go meet them. So a lot of this is ambiguous. It's putting together a high level estimate on what do you see coming from.
Right.
And one of the things you might end up doing is, probably as a part of your reviews, you're going to say, are you on track against your budget? That's something you want to keep in mind as you're progressing through the project plan, to make sure, kind of use that as a measure of success. Are you on track, or are you behind?
Absolutely. All right, so also listed on here is any project constraints, and this is a little bit different than in scope, out of scope, but there may be something that is maybe considered within the scope of your project, but it may be constrained. Like, for instance, I had done a project working on a particular process, and usually in the project you get free reign. If you need to tweak a knob, I'm talking about a production process. So if you need to change the settings on something, you need to change a material, need to change a pipe, need to do something like that. But I also had a project that none of that was allowable. So basically could change nothing physical about the process, could change very little in how the process was run. So it'd be good to have that stipulated up front. It's like, make an improvement, but make sure you do not touch this, and that area, even though they may be considered quote-unquote in scope. And also what might be included in this is actually the next line down. So there is the authorization of the black belt, but it may also be good to include what are the limits of this authority. The black belt has the authority to go ahead and use the budget and resources to this project unless the project is starting to ask for something astronomical, or maybe starting to get out of scope or something like that.
The one point I do want to make, which is not on this one, but the one before, the constraints, I really still would put that as part of the scope. I know the example you said, you cannot turn this lever or this knob. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, is that's still something that's out of scope. You have it's part of your process, sure, but you're not allowed to touch this. It can be used, I guess. It depends on how you use the tool. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. My personal experience is I put that under what's in scope and out of scope.
Okay.
But a different definition is always nice. You learn something new.
And last but not least, and for me this is like probably the most valuable part of this, is that's commitment to support and participate, signed by all the team members and the champion, certain stakeholders, maybe the process owner, and maybe you get this as an addendum after the fact, because actually this is not something that I've seen done. Usually the team members are not required to sign such a document, but I'm recommending you do, because if you say in this charter, which you can do, we will meet twice a week at such and such a time, that's clear and plain as day that you're going to do that and that you expect team members to follow suit. And you can even include maybe team ground rules as part of your project charter, or maybe you created a whole different team charter. I guess you could do that as well.
Again, I think to your point, I haven't seen team members sign it. Actually, I haven't seen a project team specifically go and individually sign it completely. But what I've seen done more is, this commitment to support and participate, again, is more in my example where I'm using it now, is more of that toll gate review for the define phase. As soon as the define's done, I kind of get the key stakeholders together along with the project team to say, this is kind of what we're proposing. This is based on all we want to do. This is how we're going to go with it. Uh-huh. Does everybody in the room agree to it? And we don't make anybody sign on a piece of paper, but we kind of get verbal approval before we move on to the next stage. Mm-hmm.
Who is in charge of creating the charter, and when is the charter initiated?
Tough question.
Kind of mentioned it before, and in an ideal situation, it should come up from up above, right? It should be done, should be handed off to the black belt before the project is even kicked off and said, this is what we'd like you to do. The black belt reads it, understands it, says, okay, I'll go do that. But in reality, it's kind of just like, we want you to work over here, address this issue, take your champion, and go figure it out.
Yeah, or in some cases, or actually referring to the example how we operate right now, it's actually, here's a concept, here's a business case, and here's what we want you to guys focus on. Now as a team, go figure out, again, to keep it simple, the define phase of your project, come back to us as stakeholders and make sure we are all in agreement, and this is what you guys are going to do. Mm-hmm. So it's mainly the black belt or the green belt or whoever is equivalent to a project leader doing that work, working with the champion and the core team to figure out what needs to be done, and coming back and presenting that to the bigger group of stakeholders to make sure everybody's on the same page. That's what I'm seeing realistically, at least in my world.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So in a nutshell, most black belts it's going to fall on the shoulders of most of the black belts. It probably be incumbent on the black belt to make sure that this document is generated with the champion, complete transparency and clarity. This is what we're going to do, and then present it out to the team members and stakeholders to get them on board. This is what we're going to do. This is what you're signing up to support, and these are the way in which I need your support. The main message here is don't skimp on the project charter. It has a lot of elements of the things you already have to do in your project, a lot of the things that we already talked about that are part of the define phase. It really doesn't take that much extra work. Summarize it. You already have all the information. Just summarize it down, communicate it out, and get the signatures. And from time and time again, refer back to it. Make sure you really still are in scope. Make sure that if things are moving in a different direction, or if people aren't pulling their own weight, pull it up. This is what we signed in for. Try to keep the momentum going on the project. Jacob, you got anything else on project charters?
No, I actually can't think of anything else. I mean, maybe we alluded to this, and I don't know if we have it on our show notes. The only other point is, I think we mentioned it is, determining the frequency of communication and clearing that part out. And it might be somewhere in the notes. I just might be missing on it. But that's about the only other thing which you want to make sure that is included in the charter, because that is something that is also critical. As like Aaron was mentioning, the communication plan here, that's going to be driven by how the frequency of communication you've determined within the team and maybe within the stakeholders, and you want to hold yourself accountable to making sure that is being practiced.
All right. So thank you very much, Jacob.
All right, Aaron. Thank you. Have a good one.
All right, you too. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks for listening to episode 23 of the E6S Methods podcast. Stay tuned for episode number 24, where we open up the key aspects of a good stakeholder analysis. Subscribe to past and future episodes of the E6S Methods podcast on iTunes, and while you're there, please leave a 5-star review. If you're like me and your device memory is eaten up by over 4,000 songs and 500 selfies, you can also stream us live on demand with Stitcher Radio. Download the apps and listen on the go. Follow us on Twitter at E6S Industries and join our LinkedIn group. Show notes are available on our website, www.e6s-methods.com. Journey through success.